live podcast. Today we're gonna have a new topic. How are you, Harold?
I'm very good. How are you, Marion?
Not too bad. It's Friday.
TGIF.
Exactly. I think we have been covered this month, the month of sustainability, and today we are quite exciting to cover a new aspect of sustainability. I think what is interesting is I was reading this week a very interesting article from Yahoo Finance, and actually that was about PropTech. So in my case, PropTech, and probably like many people, you heard PropTech, there is FinTech, HadTech, InsurTech. There are so many technology that sometimes it's a little bit difficult if you're not specifically involved to understand what it's about and what does it mean. Interestingly is when I was reading this article, I discovered that it's about the real estate industry, and of course, but what it was interesting is that this industry took a bit of time compared to other sectors or activities to really invest into technology and in startup. And what is interesting is at the moment is what was this article was explaining is that they are now putting a lot of effort in catching up financial services, like for instance with FinTech and InsurTech. And one of the reports from Jones Lang LaSalle was to highlighting the fact that just for the first half of 2021, they have seen a record in terms of funding with 9.7 billion in funding just for the first half of the year, just by, focused in investment for the PropTech. So it's quite impressive, and I was very surprised. And so, of course, that's a topic that we cover, and we're going to explain a little bit later on. This is a topic that is important for SC Ventures. The other number that I remember by reading this article was the number of startups is within 10 years, actually, they have multiplied by 4 the number of startups, which is quite impressive. Now they have something like 8,000 PropTech companies, I was very impressed. We talk many times about FinTech because maybe we are a bank and it sounds obvious, but I was very, very impressed. And so my takeaway and conclusion from that article is that a lot of things happening. There is a boom at the moment related to that industry and the PropTech. And automatically, this is also something that is interesting for us because it makes sense when we talked about sustainability. And that's why we wanted today to dedicate that podcast to PropTech with our guest that we will introduce a little bit later.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's a topic that we see more and more often. And actually, on the topic of sustainability, there's a huge connection between PropTech and sustainability.
Of course.
And how technology can have a direct impact, not just financially. Obviously, we're a VC. So we're looking at a financial return, but we're also interested in having a bigger impact, I would say. And what's the impact on the well-being of people, the well-being of employees, but also, obviously, the link to sustainability and the care for our planet. As you mentioned, sustainability is a big topic for us, both at SC Ventures. It's one of our 6 high conviction themes, but also at the bank.
For the bank, of course.
I think our CEO has made a strong commitment of reaching carbon neutrality, not just for us, but also in terms of our relationship with our clients and our relationship with our corporates. So it's a big commitment, I think, overall for us.
Generally speaking, with all our partners, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's reaching carbon neutrality in the next few years. I mean, we're not talking decades and decades. And just again trying to connect to PropTech. And we recently this year made an announcement of creating the first carbon exchange in the region. And that carbon exchange will enable technology components so that companies, institutions will be able to trade carbon credits that are authenticated through satellite connections, through blockchain technology. And that is quite unique. And maybe for PropTech, what that means is if you're able to save enough energy, you'll be able to trade these points on such a platform. So we're going to talk about a few things like that. I think for today, we have a few guests. So let me introduce a few of them, I guess. Maybe we can talk and first link to a challenge we recently had on the FinTech Bridge. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, you're right. So we have, as you know, today it's a FinTech Bridge podcast, live podcast. And what is important is we have this platform where with the objective is to connect startup investors, corporates around, let's say, problem. It is how it is, a problem, and how to find technology, etc. And a few weeks back, we had actually launched a PropTech challenge, and we that is still ongoing. That was one of our team from property who is managing and who was, let's say, the sponsor of this challenge, with the idea that we could improve in our own premises the consumption related to electricity and water, and how can we monitor better, etc. And in that context, so we were looking for startup, and one of them is here today, Carnot Innovation, and we will have the opportunity to know a little bit more about the solution itself. But so I should introduce you first, Ashish. Ashish Justin, who is the co-founder and the CEO of Carnot Innovation Limited, who is a startup, venture, whatever we say, or whatever the word we use, who utilizing data and for optimizing, building operation cost. Welcome, Ashish, to this conversation and this podcast today. Maybe you can introduce yourself and give us a little bit of flavor about what you do at Carnot Innovation.
Yeah, sounds good. So thank you so much, Marion, and also Harold, for the great introduction and also inviting us to this particular podcast. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. And my name is Ashish Justin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Carnot Innovations. We were founded back in 2018, and I founded this company together with my co-founder, Chris. And what we do is we provide an AI-powered software platform which automatically collects data from different building systems. It could be an automation system. It could be any kind of mechanical system which is running and cooling the buildings down, the HVAC, the air conditioning systems. We collect data automatically from these air conditioning and mechanical systems, especially we target the ones which consume a lot of energy. And then we try to optimize them, and we run them in a most optimal manner so that we save energy consumption for the entire facility. So we do this by analyzing the data and running the data through our proprietary machine learning modules, which calculate the best set point or best sequence of operations for this equipment. And we write these in real time back to the controllers of that said equipment. And thereby we improve the efficiency, and we keep the same cooling load as the building requires it while reducing the energy consumption. So we are currently working with about 28 buildings across Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and Thailand. We are live across all these facilities, and we're generating anywhere between 10 to 15% real-time energy savings for each of these facilities. By doing that, we are saving not just energy, but we're also improving the wellness of people inside the facility. And we're also improving the sustainability of the whole building, and we're helping them reach their ESG targets, while at the end of the day, improving the environment and saving carbon emissions.
Very interesting. Thanks, Ashish. And before we go deeper into the conversation and some of the topics we're going to discuss today, I want to introduce a few of the other guests. So I'll start with another startupper. Her name is Virginia Brumby Ferreira. She's the founder of Place. We got introduced through one of our other guests on this show today, Marie. But maybe you can explain a little bit your background. I know you're a fellow INSEADer. You were the official entrepreneur in residence at INSEAD, and also you have a background in journalism. You founded your own business, and you're passionate about ESG. So, Virginia, welcome, and if you can introduce you a little bit better.
Thank you so much, Harold. You had actually a pretty tough job. Introducing me is always a little tricky. And the same goes for introducing myself. I remember like some years ago, I was living in India, in Delhi, and I was actually applying to do my MBA at INSEAD. And I remember my recruiter, I was in an interview, and he took one look at my LinkedIn, and then he took a look at my CV, and then he looked at me and he said, "Your career is a hot mess." He's like, "What is going on here?" Basically. So I've done basically everything from diplomacy to journalism to waitressing to startups, NGOs, you name it, on I think 5 different continents. I guess the only kind of connecting thread is, I guess, my desire to have a positive impact on people, on quality of life. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 10 years. And the new venture that I've been working on along with NG Factory, so with Marie, who's on this call, is called Place. It's very early stage, but basically it's all about harnessing tech to make office spaces and office buildings more sustainable for both people and planet. Basically, we want to help companies achieve their net zero targets while at the same time improving the workplace experience for the employees. And our tagline is a kind of, maximum experience and minimum footprint. So that's a short intro to what I'm doing.
Thanks, Virginia, and welcome on today's show. So let's introduce Marie, since we both mentioned her. So Marie, we've been talking probably for the past 6-7 months. Marie is part of the NG Factory team, which is the CVC arm of NG. And so we're doing a number of things with NG Factory. We recently announced a partnership. It would be great if you could introduce yourself and what you do more specifically at NG Factory.
Sure. Thanks, Harold and Marion and SC Ventures for having us on today, and looking forward to the discussion. So as you mentioned, I lead the venture build program at NG Factory. For those of you who don't know NG, it's a French utilities company. We're actually the largest private generator of electricity in the world. And NG made a decision in about 2015 to become a leader in net zero and carbon neutrality. So that meant, for example, divesting all of our coal assets, and also starting to support our customers and our clients in their own decarbonization journeys. At Factory, we're the venture arm of NG, and we primarily work with talented entrepreneurs such as Virginia to launch completely new companies that accelerate the transition to zero, so net zero. Very excited to share a little bit more about our thinking and our thesis around, I think, the intersection between decarbonization, ventures, and the kind of impact that ventures can have in that space today, as well as the specific area of PropTech.
Welcome, Marie. And maybe finally to join us today, we have Apoorv. Apoorv Suri is part of SC Ventures. He has a number of different hats, but he's both...
He's an entrepreneur, actually. He has an entrepreneur mindset, right?
A little bit, but he also has a bit of a corporate background. But so Apoorv works actually with me and probably a little bit with you as well.
With me too.
And he's both on.
But why don't we let him introduce himself, right?
Okay. Well, how about you do that, Apoorv?
I actually wanted you guys to keep going. I was curious what you.
Before I say something wrong, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks, Harold, Marie, and Marion, and the rest of the panelists for this discussion today. I'm Apoorv. My background, I joined the bank 8 years ago in New York. I've been a corporate banker for quite some time, and I won't bore you with the details, but I was in sort of the transaction banking space across product, across a bit of business planning management and sales. 3.5 years ago, I moved to SC Ventures, and that's where a lot of my sort of unlearning and relearning happened. And I feel privileged that I was able to do that at an earlier stage of my career. And my focus since then has been on various different streams, as Harold and Marion mentioned, which included sort of initially building out our venture building sort of machinery. We had, I remember, 4 ventures, and now we're up to 30. So how do we support that? And over the last 1.5 to 2 years, I've increasingly been focusing on developing joint ventures with clients, which I'll get into a little bit later. So that's a little bit of me. I wish I had the background you did, Virginia. Mine's a lot more boring.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, that's great. But well, maybe we can go into, more specifically about today's topic, Mary.
Yes. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's about PropTech, just in case you didn't get it. Yes, PropTech, and maybe to start really jumping into the conversation, maybe I have a few questions, a little bit like generic question, but I think that would be a good start. So we talked about PropTech, we talked about the real estate industry, but if in the audience we have some people who not really clear about what is PropTech and what does it mean concretely, if you have to give one sentence to these people in the audience so that they understand better what is a PropTech and they could explain to somebody else, what would you say? Who wants to start?
I think we should give it to maybe
like at school.
Virginia or Ashish, since this is really your area.
Okay, maybe I will go first. So yeah, PropTech is, as the name suggests, any kind of technology, any kind of innovation, or any kind of platform which can help people associated with the property industry. It could be things like starting from real estate, on how to get a house, or how do you find the price of a particular house, and going all the way down to how do you manage a big property, like a multi-floored commercial building, and how do you optimize it so that you reduce the energy consumption for that facility. So it's a huge scope. So basically any kind of technology which can be applied to a property where people live, where people grow and sustain, I would consider that as PropTech.
Okay, great. Virginia, did you want to compliment a little bit with your part?
So I want to compliment Ashish for actually describing PropTech. I actually found out that my venture was a PropTech when it was described to me as such. So I have to say that I find that PropTech is a very ubiquitous kind of term that's thrown around a lot. And it's exciting because it encompasses so much, but it can also be confusing as to what it actually entails. So usually when people ask me, what is PropTech? What are you doing in the PropTech sector? And I'm like, well, mine is about sustainability, which is one of the kind of ongoing trends in PropTech. So I kind of tell them, A, the world is on fire. B, the future of work is changing forever. So let's see what we can do about this in office spaces. So this is my one-line explanation of what I do in PropTech. I think Ashish has given a much more concrete explanation of it, but it's definitely something that is being talked about a lot right now, and I think includes a lot of interesting developments across different sectors.
Okay. We see, from the article that Marion mentioned, we do see a lot of momentum, both in terms of investment, but in terms of the number of PropTech, FinTech companies that are being created and that are out there. Do you see this as a positive impact to you guys? Do you see, are VCs knocking on your door? Are clients, widely opening their portfolio to you? What's the impact on you guys, I guess?
Okay, so maybe I can go first. So yeah, PropTech, as Harold just mentioned, there is a huge boom, I would say. So as previously Marianne mentioned, there are other industries which have grown really fast, and PropTech is growing really fast right now, but it is slowly catching up to what other industries have achieved in the past. So recently we have seen with the availability of other technologies, things like blockchain, machine learning, AI, and IoT devices, and these things have become really affordable and really easy to use as well for different applications. And now we see these things come into the PropTech space as well. So you can see a lot of companies come inside PropTech where they build IoT devices for monitoring carbon dioxide emissions inside the space, or monitoring temperatures of different spaces inside buildings. And we also see different other kinds of startups coming up who are using the blockchain technology together with PropTech. For transaction purposes, also for doing carbon bonds and purchasing carbon stuff for the net zero part. So I would say there's a huge traction happening. But besides just the request from the clients, we also see that many countries are pushing this forward as well. So countries such as currently it's Singapore. They have a huge initiative by BCA, which through which I would say there's a requirement for buildings to be audited and to have some sort of standard. It could be the green, the platinum standard. Similarly, even Hong Kong has a standard like that, the green building standard. And when people achieve these particular standards, they're given initiatives. So they can either build more floors on top, or they can also have tax initiatives, which are pushing property developers to actually incorporate this and getting these standards set up in their buildings, and which is helping push this industry to another level.
And so can we say, maybe to summarize that, let's say regulation or maybe some standard that have been brought maybe by government, plus the fact that now some technology are maybe a little bit more accessible, that those two facts, if I have to say this way, or element of context, has enabled the boom of this PropTech and real estate industry investing in those technology?
True. And I also see that people like large corporations right now, especially the corporations which have multiple facilities and buildings, they're much more conscious about the impact they have, the carbon impact they have towards the surroundings. So that's another thing which is also pushing PropTech, because they're actively looking for solutions through which they can reduce their carbon footprint as well as their carbon emissions. So it's a combination of all the three things, the government, the technology, as well as the drive from the corporates itself to do something to reduce their impact towards the environment.
And according to all of you, based on what you see and what you know, and with this technology and how this technology, let's say, help and support the progress, where do you think, where do you see the future related to PropTech? What is your bet?
Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to take a bet about the future of PropTech, but maybe as a kind of follow-up to your previous question and touching on this one as well, I think the traction is huge right now because, just if you look at the basic statistics, it's like something 90+% of companies plan to remain on a hybrid work format now. Over 50% are reconfiguring their office spaces. You have like 80% of the workers are disengaged. Over 2,000, almost 2,500 companies have signed on the race to zero. So all these factors are kind of converging, and we've reached this tipping point, and all the major companies are saying we have to do something about our office buildings and our office spaces. So it's like not somewhere on some to-do list anymore. It's like, now we need to do something. So even as an early stage venture, when I call up these companies and I want to speak to their, corporate real estate team or their sustainability team, they are ready to hear me out, or they are ready to hear out entrepreneurs like Ashish and others who are out there maybe thinking of starting up their venture, because the problem is here and now. And there's a fantastic opportunity while all these companies are anyway going to be changing their office spaces to bring in the sustainability angle and get them to net zero. So I see a huge opportunity and trend there, which is really exciting and encouraging, in fact.
Virginia, maybe I can build on that sort of convergence, because I think there's also an element of technology being converged in this space. Obviously, we've seen the announcements of smart cities and things like that, but we've talked about IoT. But when you add elements of sort of 5G, virtual and augmented reality, blockchain, even on a retail basis, as an investor, I can look at fractional investing into real estate. I think all of that sort of converges into this PropTech thematic. Now, whether there's a commercial impact or a retail impact, I think there's a lot of startups solving for different situations. But it's interesting to see this convergence. And on top of that, obviously, you have real-time data and how people and companies and cities talk to each other.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, Mary, your bet?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that I was talking to somebody from Salt Mine earlier today. So they just raised their Series A. I think they've raised over 20 million, and they're also kind of in the PropTech space. And it is exactly kind of what Virginia and Apoorv were talking about, this kind of confluence of demand, technology that's at a certain level of maturity, data becoming becoming more prevalent. But I think the other thing that's also sort of worth mentioning is that a lot of times PropTech has been a very manual process, right? Or property management has been quite a manual process. So very heavily reliant on drawings or tables that have been printed, hard copies of information that sits in several places. And now, as the future of work is evolving, the way that people are using spaces is evolving. There's a real need to actually change that kind of very antiquated or old style of working, and bring in other inputs, other data, in order to help companies kind of transition and transform. So, the example that was raised to me was, when one of the large banks was looking at rationalizing its office spaces and revamping, they realized that all of their plans were on paper, and they all sat in people's desks and filing cabinets. And just something like that is just a real example of now that these companies are in a space where they have to make decisions about their space and their office buildings, they're starting to realize that you can use so much more data. There's so many more processes and systems that can help transform the way that properties are used and managed.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point, because I would say both at SCV and maybe at NG Factory, we would not necessarily look at PropTech separately, but we've recently decided to get in a partnership together. So we've been working on a few projects, and Places is one of them. Can you shed a little bit of light on your side about this partnership, and what brought NG Factory together with SC Ventures, and what we're trying to achieve? And then maybe Apoorv, you can complement that afterwards with your view as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like I've been working with the team here for the last 6 months on this, so it's definitely been a joint effort. Maybe I could just start by elaborating a little bit about our thesis at NG Factory, right? So I mentioned that we're looking to introduce innovation by building new ventures, right? So launching completely new ideas. And the rationale behind that is that we realize that the energy transition and decarbonization more broadly is quite a technical space. And even there are a lot of entrepreneurs, such as Virginia, out there that are interested in making an impact, but we can often provide some sort of skills and expertise in helping and pointing them in the right direction, kind of saying that these are challenges that are worth solving. And specifically what we're looking for is businesses that have the potential to be billion-dollar businesses, so using exactly that kind of venture lens, and have the ability to abate 100 megatons of carbon at scale. So we call them 0.1 gigaton companies. And then the value that NG brings to this is a lot of the technical expertise, a lot of the technical knowledge, being able to leverage our existing customer networks and partners. But when we started to look at this space, one of the things that we realized early on is that there's only so much that we're going to be able to build, or only certain types of companies that we're going to be able to build if we work just on our own. And through our conversations with yourself, and then the work that we've been doing, I think to build an ecosystem of corporate venture builders, each of which also brings their own expertise, skill sets, technology, partners. What we realized is that there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate, right, in different ways. Collaborate in terms of helping to generate opportunities and bringing different perspectives at the ideation stage. The opportunity to partner and co-build ventures together. So we're also co-building a venture together where there's a really strong added value from both parties. So the one that we're building together is Sustain Atom, which is sustainably linked supply chain finance or finance mechanism. So clearly, the skill sets of both organizations is very obvious. And then there's also opportunities where there's potential for us to be advisors, first customers, proving grounds, test beds for each other's ventures, which is what we're similarly doing with Place. And who knows where that might evolve, right? That may evolve into a co-build as well. But I think that's really the power of not just doing corporate venture building alone, but doing corporate venture building in a community and with really strong partners, such as the one that we, the partnership that we built with SC Ventures.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. Just to add to that, and Harold mentioned a very interesting point earlier about, individually we would have not gone into the property space, and it's something that we have formed in the form of a non-traditional partnership. And you see that ecosystem sort of evolving, where the relationship, whether if you look at it from a bank standpoint, it's going from sort of a service provider to one of a growth partner, where we can collectively target areas. And especially given sort of the kind of industries you guys are connected to, or we are connected to, the opportunities are immense. And to that end, we have, a lot of different themes that we're looking at. Traditionally, as a bank, we wouldn't have been able to get into unless we had the right partner in hand and the right resources and the right expertise at the table. So I think that lends itself to an immense amount of opportunity going forward. But I think you'll also attest to this, that, as everybody thinks about optionality, as individuals or corporates, they develop their own proprietary thinking and their own methodologies. And there's an element of bridging that gap. Yes, there's obviously commonality, things like HCD, et cetera, but everybody has a very different way of approaching optionality. Now, whether it's investing or venture building, again, it's very different. And I think that's where we had to get a little bit creative, Marie, because obviously NG Factory has their way of building and we have ours, not to say one is right or wrong, but we had to find that middle ground and get very, very creative on how do we do it. But with a view that we're striving towards a common goal, and with a view that we understand what are the expertise that are being brought to the table, whether it's for Place or whether it's for Sustain Atom or any other venture or joint venture that we develop. I think that becomes implicitly critical that if this is a gap that we're collectively looking to target, what are the expertise that you're bringing, what am I bringing, and how can we solve for it? And then yes, monetize it, become growth partners, and add optionality to ourselves. So yeah, I think I mean, personally, I've been in this space for quite some time, so I have a fair amount of conviction with client co-creation, and especially in joint venturing. The opportunities to me, and generally, I would say are limitless. It's just a question of finding the right community, the right sort of people, and obviously the right propositions and places to target together.
Yeah, 100%, right?
Because I mean, about venture building, no?
I do. I agree. I think what we've talked about is about the corporate environment, about the startup environment. But I think one of the things you mentioned to me a little bit earlier was also the regulators and so forth. So I think you had a question around that.
Yes, and it's maybe not only for Mary, but also for the other ones. It depends who wants to take the question for the regulation. One of the question is, so of course there is regulation also for the real estate industry. There is no reason you don't have it, right? All about policies, green building, and my question is, what is the one thing that government, based on what you have seen, based on in a different region, not only in Asia, by the way, so what are the one across the world that needs to encourage, or according to you, what is the one that encourages the most an implementation, that will be effective for all about green building measures?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in with my view on this, and I think the single biggest thing that governments, and Singapore, I think, does a great job of this. Other markets like Australia are super forward looking in it, right? But basically introducing incentives and penalties for to basically green buildings, right? So there's so much that can be done around retrofitting of business of buildings. A lot of it isn't done because the payback period or the capex required is extensive. So creating the right kind of incentives, and then also sort of penalties for buildings that don't meet certain standards, I think is probably the easiest thing that governments can do, and many have already started. But I think the flavor that I would maybe add to this is that the climate change is such a pressing concern, right? Buildings are 9.9 gigatons of carbon a year. Construction industry, 3.7 gigatons of carbon a year. So I think the every time somebody asks me a question about regulation, my response is always that we don't have to wait for regulation to change in order to influence change. And I think what the industry really needs is business models that are aligned to what stakeholders and what customers really want to pay money for. So, you know, around better use of space, space utilization, around workplace experience, and making sure that there's a strong sustainability element in there is ultimately going to be a massive driver of change. I'm just going to throw like one more stat out there. So in APAC, it's estimated in the next, I think it's 5 or 10 years, that there's going to be 1.3 billion square foot of additional commercial real estate being built, right? Over half of the construction of office buildings happens in the region, right? So, you know, it's absolutely essential that Asia kind of maybe leapfrogs some of the slower pace of innovation, and there's absolutely the opportunity to do so. The opportunity to go straight to green is really present here.
You talked about the region, you talked about Singapore, about Australia. I think, Ashish, you have some first-hand experience with Hong Kong as well, and maybe even China. So what has been your experience in terms of some of the regulations there? Do you see a movement towards green building? And is it, something, to Marie's point, it needs to be driven by the corporate, which I fully embrace, but at some point you also need governments and regulators to be on board. What's your take on that side?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Mary mentioned as well. So there has been a push from the corporate side to reduce climate change, but governments are also taking action. So Singapore has taken a leap forward. I think it's one of the first few nations in APAC to push for a really regulated way of monitoring energy as well as reducing energy consumption for commercial buildings. But following Singapore, I also see a lot of other places, like Hong Kong is currently doing it. So one of the examples is we have BEAM protocol in Hong Kong, where you have to do energy audits for a building which is above a certain size and has been in operation for, say, 10 years or more. Without doing that,
can you explain BEAM? Because I don't know if everyone knows what BEAM means. Can you explain what BEAM means and stands for?
Yes. So BEAM is basically a government body in Hong Kong, which strives to reduce energy consumption for buildings and benchmark energy performance for different facilities. So they have different levels of ratings which they give to buildings, through which you can tell whether there's a benchmark or how the facility has been performing. So the government is pushing through these different kind of measures. And in Hong Kong recently, we also have EMSD, which is the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, which is pushing for retro-commissioning of buildings. So retro-commissioning is basically a process where you monitor the building really closely through technology or just doing a site visit and site audit. And by using that particular information which you have observed, then you do some kind of fine-tuning on how the buildings operate to reduce its energy consumption on a day-to-day basis. So Hong Kong has been pushing quite a lot for retro-commissioning as well, and we see that this is happening, and this is something which governments locally as well as abroad, even outside Asia, has been pushing for. Yeah.
So thank you for these details about Hong Kong and the regulation. So I think one of the sentence I think Mary just said, and I capture, is that we don't need to wait for the regulation, which I quite like it. And I think also just before Approve was mentioning about the importance of co-creating, and you were mentioning the partnership. I think it will be also relevant because not everybody knows what is SC Venture, what we do in terms of venture building, that we just share a little bit more with the audience. What does it mean?
Not everybody knows?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's why we are here, right? So you're going to explain a little bit more, right? What do we do? And how can we, maybe there are some partners who have some initiative maybe around sustainability, but other theme, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, we look at venture building as creating optionality outside of the bank and creating new business models that we potentially could not do internally and all by ourselves. So I think, we look at very early stage idea, and we provide the right level of resource, the right capabilities, the right methodologies, obviously a little bit of funding as well. And sometimes we partner with other industry experts who want to embark with us on that journey. So, and then we have different phases, from incubation all the way to commercialization. But that's the idea, innovate, scale, fund, and provide optionality outside of the bank and provide new business models. So that's what we do. I think as Apoorv mentioned, we started a few years ago. We only had 4 ventures. Now we have 30 ventures in our portfolio, and growing every month. So that's what we do. And I think the ones that we're doing with NG Factory are around sustainability, and specifically around efficiency and whether it's on supply chain or whether it's around PropTech. So maybe we can talk a little bit about place, because we haven't had really a chance to understand in more details what you do, Virginia. It would be great if you could explain. So what is place about? And I think we came across because you first approached the property group of SC Bank. But yeah, I mean, how did you approach them, and with what proposition exactly?
So yeah, actually it came through contact in SC Ventures, actually Alex, and then I got introduced to the property group. And, we just got into some really interesting conversations with a number of colleagues in that group, Dennis, Darren, Jennifer, Nishi, I could name the many that have been super helpful, Scott. And they were just, really open about how SCB really wants to kind of like be a leader in this field. Not only in sustainability, but also in, future of work. And you guys have very bold strategies to kind of transform office spaces. I kind of feel like what I'm hearing is this COVID is just a wake-up call, right? So forward-thinking companies like you guys are transforming everything. So it's not just about changing the spaces themselves. It's a whole change in strategy. It's like a paradigm shift, right? So before we woke up and we went to the office because that's what we had to do. And now we know that isn't necessarily true. So suddenly, the office has to justify its existence. The office has to become like a destination with a purpose, right? If you ask companies across industries, they would tell you the same. I spoke with the Google head of HR, and he told me, hey, now at our offices, it's going to be less ping pong, more purpose, right? So you hear this across the board, that suddenly we need to change the office space, and the pressure for offices to be not only places that are productive, that are collaborative, that are places of connection, but also they have to be sustainable. And this pressure is coming not just from the C-suite or the board or whoever. It's coming from the investors, it's coming from the consumers, it's coming from the employees themselves. If your office is not a comfortable, productive, interesting, attractive, sustainable place to be, you won't go. So I think this is like kind of places what we're trying to address is how can we make the office space, as I said, more sustainable for both people and planet. Because in the end, your office can be, sustainable and good lighting and have, whatever the newest tech. And if the people don't want to go there, that's not sustainable either.
I'm going to ask you a little bit like the devil advocate question. So
Go ahead.
if I think about sustainability, immediately I'm going to talk about saving energy and water consumption into a building. Is there something else? Is there other things to do? Which type of technology I may found if today I have to build my PropTech company?
So, I mean, obviously the things you're mentioning are extremely important. But I think the newest thing will also be to measure what exactly are people doing at the office? What is their purpose in going there? What brings them there? Are they going there to see that colleague? Are they going there because they want to collaborate? Are they going there to do deep work? Are they going there to socialize? So if we know what they're going there to do, then we can make sure that the office is fit for purpose. So then the utilization is much higher. Then the efficiency can also be much higher. Like, let's say I go to the office because I want to connect with colleagues. So I need to go on days when other colleagues will be there in the spaces where those colleagues will be. And it's very easy to create tools that will enable that. So I think there's a kind of convergence to be found between the social aspect and the sustainability, and actually they go hand in hand. So that's where place is looking to go.
If I'm not wrong, last time we have a similar conversation, I think that was also about if the idea is to bring people to the office, that we needed also potentially to provide them additional services to make them, visit the office, let's say this way, or stay longer. And my question would be, do you think now we are tending to have, maybe as a model, what have previously done some Google, Apple, etc., providing a lot of services in-house so that you spend a lot of time in the office? Do you think is this something that we tend to
okay. Let me say yes and no. I think that it's now going to be about quality time and not quantity time. So certain companies like, Google is a great example. They have amazing offices, right? You've probably had the food at Google. But as you said, the idea was to get people to spend as much time at the office as possible, right?
Yep.
That is no longer, as far as the 80 conversations I've had with major companies, that is no longer their idea, right? There's no longer the idea to have the biggest offices, the nicest offices, to have people there, 15, 18 hours a day. The idea is that when they feel they need to come into the office, it is the most collaborative, productive, attractive, sustainable place that it can be. And that they go away from the office feeling that was an excellent experience. I know that when I do need to go into the office, I will get done what I need to do. I will connect with who I need to connect with. I can also feel good about my carbon footprint. So I would just nuance that it's not necessarily about making people go to the office more. It's just that making sure the time is quality time spent, and that it's, going into the office is actually exciting and attractive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, one of the questions that we have is, I get it for new buildings, okay, or I get it for like new places and so forth, but we have a lot of old buildings, in everywhere in the world. So maybe Ashish, actually, what is your experience on how we can digitalize old buildings and make them more energy efficient? Maybe you want to start over there?
Sure. I think before we even go into digitalization, the first thing is to change the mindset of people who are working in these old buildings. So it could start all the way from the tenants just knowing when to turn the lights off when they leave an office space, or turn the aircon off. And then going all the way down to the landlords, if they have some kind of practice through which they can conserve energy, conserve water, and they know that there's such a practice available and is enforced by the manager of the building or the landowner, then this could save a lot of energy as well as water and other waste, as we can reduce a lot of waste. But then we move into digitalization. So that's where technologies like IoT comes in. So recently
it starts with the education part. So
that's correct.
People understand what's at stake and things like that.
Same that
exactly. So basically just having a poster everywhere in the office saying that turn the lights off when you leave the building, or just reduce water when you use it. So that's the education part. But then moving into the actual digital part and using technology, that's where IoT and other devices come in. So if you have a temperature sensor through which you can monitor the indoor temperature or even occupancy of the space, and then automatically turn off the lights when a person forgets to turn it off and they leave a meeting room, that's one way of application of technology through which you can reduce energy. But then as we go from, say, smaller facilities into larger buildings, for larger buildings, you most likely have centralized cooling systems. And then if you have some sort of building automation or building management systems, which can automatically monitor these large buildings and control these chiller equipment, which produces cold water needed to cool the entire space, and automatically turn it off and turn it on when and as they are required by the tenants and landlords, then it can save a lot more energy. So that's where digitalization comes in. So we can have IoT systems in places which can automatically monitor this, and then you can have software solutions looking at data coming from these IoT systems and using that data and generating insights to improve the energy efficiency and automatically controlling these buildings so that they're more sustainable and energy efficient. So starting all the way from education, then using technology, and then getting a whole feedback loop, which can help with the reduction of carbon emission for the building.
And Virginia, do you want to add on to that with your take as well on what place does for existing spaces?
Sure.
Maybe?
So definitely. So at least I can give Singapore as an example. Is they have this very bold green plan, as you know, and they actually, and I think it's like a 80-80-80 plan, as they call it. So basically, they want 80% of the buildings to be green by 2030. They want 80% of buildings to be, the new buildings to be super low energy efficiency. And so they're putting a lot of incentives there, I think. And if we put that side by side with the fact that a lot of companies are changing office because of what we've been discussing until now. The opportunity is there because they are anyway, a lot of them resizing, right sizing, moving. There are incentives in place for the retrofitting. So it's a great time to get in some of these technologies like what Ashish was mentioning, because anyway, they're redoing things. So it's a great kind of crossover between people are moving their office, the regulations are coming into play, the new technologies are there. It's the time to act.
And I think COVID has definitely had an impact. I mean, Apoorv, you were sharing some of your personal decisions based on the impact that COVID has had on you.
Sounds like a bit anxious the way you say that.
For the audience, to be clear, I didn't have a COVID. If you could.
Not judging. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely did. So I guess earlier this year, I was looking to move out of my place and get a bigger place, purely because I'm working from home that much more. But it seems like everybody else has the same idea, and that sort of bracket of larger places from home are selling out quite easily. And I think thematically, it obviously sort of showcases that people are looking to work from home more, looking to get their own space at home. But personally, I decided to delay my decision by a year because I don't know what post-pandemic world is going to look like, how much I'm going to be in the office. And I think, Virginia, to your point, increasingly every day, I have to make a decision when I wake up or the day before. Am I going to the office? Why am I going to the office? And is it worth going to the office when I'm going to be spending an hour and a half on my commute? Either way, and I could rather use that time at home and be more productive. Notwithstanding the fact that there's definitely sort of places and engagements that being there physically makes a lot more sense. And that's something, I think most people keep in mind as they plan their weeks, to plan their days. So I guess in that context, yeah, I mean, I had that personal experience. I've delayed it by a year. Hopefully I can get a bigger place, but it seems like prices are going up. There's a big element of supply chain disruptions, which again, it goes back to that same theme, but yeah, well, I guess we'll wait and see where things go.
Yeah, no, just let me comment quickly. So Apoorv, that's exactly the kind of dilemma that we'd like to help you solve with Place. That when you wake up in the morning, is it worth my while to go to the office? Because that makes, it's more efficient for you, it's more efficient for the office, and better productivity and collaboration all around. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, today as well, there are sometimes awkward situations where I'm not planning to be in the office, or I am in the office. And you ask the people you're collaborating with, where are you? And there's always that awkward moment that, oh, I'm at home. And there's an element of guilt there, still, at least for me. But I know maybe that's just a me thing and not a general thing.
No, it's not only you.
Okay.
I mean, Marion and I, we were discussing earlier, and I think we can see the benefit from a business perspective to a landlord, potentially even for tenants on the optimization, etc. But from a business perspective, when you're a VC, I guess, or when you're a big corporation sponsoring companies like that, how do we evaluate the monetization of such businesses? Because it takes a while before some of these startups are going to show any revenues. So Marie, I'd be interested in your perspective on that as well, which is what's in it, I would say from a strategy perspective at Engie, and then at Engie Factory.
Yeah, I mean, look, Engie, I think our revenue is like 60 billion a year, right? So if the stake that's in Virginia's company, for example, goes from what we've invested and we get a 5x return on it, it's not even going to be a footnote, in our annual statements, right? So to put it in context, then it becomes the question of why invest in innovation this way, and what we're looking for is or the way that we see startups is as a way to experiment in innovation, in new technology, in new business models, in new data models, in a way that corporates can't do, or is extremely expensive for corporates to do, right? And we see, I guess, the corporate version of investing in early stage startups is actually risk sharing, right? So we are sharing risk with a very talented entrepreneur. We both believe that this has potential, which is why we invest in the venture. And because of our investment, both of us have the potential to see upside. I would say Factory generally takes minority stakes in our ventures. So, we want our entrepreneurs to be incentivized and to work for, a much more significant upside than we see. And, ultimately, if this is a very successful venture and it takes off, then there's many potentials. If it's very strategically aligned to NG's core business, then NG always has the potential to acquire it. We don't put any restrictive terms on our entrepreneurs or on our ventures, but that's always, I think, in everyone's back of the mind, right? If this works out the way that we think it, is this a potential to acquire the business? And then secondly, all of our ventures have this energy transition component, which means that, for example, with Virginia's startup Place, the intention is to offset all of the carbon that is not addressed through energy efficiency mechanisms. So what does, there's the first step with offset is on-site solar. The second is local renewable energy certificates. Then it's regional renewable energy certificates, and then it's offsets. And that entire value chain that I described is services that NG provides to its customers. So Place could potentially be a massive aggregator of demand for renewable energy or carbon offsets. And in that way, there's a real synergy and strategic alignment between the types of ventures that we build and NG's core business.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, I would let's ask the startup, I guess, what they're expecting from big corporations or CVCs or VCs like us. I mean, is it, mostly funding, or is it also
maybe, yeah. What is the advice?
Yeah.
What is advice for us?
Ashish, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to go ahead?
Okay, I can also answer that. Yes, we've been also working together with a lot of big startups in Hong Kong. So we have a partner called JEC through whom we are expanding our deployments. It's a Jardine Engineering Corporation. And one of the key things is that in addition to the funding which the large startups or large companies can offer, then second thing is the network. So they have a ton of buildings where we can actually try out our innovative solutions and then see if it actually works out and get feedback from their operational staff and use that feedback to fine tune and redevelop our product and then go deploy it to other places or other places. So it's not just the funding. Funding is one thing which is important, but the most important thing is getting the network to a place like a place where we can try out our solution, get feedback, and then fine tune it and grow.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if you have a good idea, especially in this space, you will get funding. So of course the money is always interesting and important, but to me, the key is kind of the expertise behind it, the kind of early support, and as she says, ability to, tie in with partnerships like the one that you guys have to kind of get early traction and give you the confidence to go ahead with something to identify the problem statement more quickly. So yeah, it really is an accelerator in every sense of the word.
Great. I think we have two questions from the audience before we close.
Yeah,
let's
quickly, because I'm going to be, the topic is so passionate. Everybody's super passionate. We are overrunning, but
let's ask at least one of these questions. I think, maybe very quickly for Apoorv, people want to understand better the partnership model and how we collaborate. So if you can very quickly tackle that aspect, how we collaborate with NG Factory and what's our partnership model?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with the partnership first. There are very different models that we have, and implicit in it is sort of the understanding and the appreciation that you need to be flexible when working with other corporates or clients or whatever have you. Their co-creation or joint venturing can start bottom up. So you start with a problem statement, with a thematic, you bring in the right people and you build that out. And in a sense, by doing that, you're kind of de-risking yourself, but you're also bringing in the right people to sort of grow that proposition out. And then there's other types of models where obviously, somebody might already have something in play. And that's where you go in and say, well, we see what you have, but we think we can bring X to the table. And by bringing X to the table, we could 10X, 20X, 30X this proposition. And that in itself obviously requires a lot of negotiation on, what you think your valuation is, what we think it is, compared to sort of a blue sky co-creation where nothing's really been created or it's free money. So I think, the point there is that you have to be flexible. And I could go on with the different types of models that we have. NG Factory obviously being more on sort of the blue sky side of things. Obviously, with nothing has been built, but there's been a bit of a hypothesis that's been built up, and that's really how we're approaching clients, with obviously flexibility and creativity in mind. And I'm sure Marie can attest to that last part.
Okay, great.
All right.
Yeah, I think the last question, Ashish has addressed a little bit about the cost of digitalization, but probably we can do that offline. Just conscious of time, I think we have to, I think it's time to wrapping up for today's session.
I'm so sad already.
Me too,
Okay.
me too. I'm sure also the same for they are smiling. I don't know what does it mean.
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But
So we have to remind also
the FinTech Bridge.
Absolutely. So for people who are not aware of what it's about, we have an amazing platform called SC Venture FinTech Bridge.
That's where we got connected to Ashish.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. And we try as much as possible every time during our podcast to invite one of our members. We have now 1,500 members. So what is about is about connecting people, startup, corporate, some of our clients, by the way, also all the different community builder that we call expert, could be like investors, accelerator, startup association. So if you're one of them and you're not yet on the platform, you need to go. Easy, you will find directly on Google just by typing FinTech Bridge or SC Ventures FinTech Bridge, and you can create very quickly the profile. You will find also, not immediately, but this video today has been recorded. And so if people want to have a look or miss maybe the beginning of the session, they will find that on the platform. And also this is the last podcast of our sustainability months. We already have one previously. So all this content, article, blogs, and video will be on the platform and are already on the platform, most of them, except the one of today, not yet. What else I can say?
What's next month?
DeFi.
Okay.
Yes, we have actually already started the months because we have already some content article that have been posted, and we're gonna have also 2 other podcasts, but we cannot say yet what it's about. They have to stay tuned, but it will be about DeFi.
Sounds good.
We have to think.
I think we have to thank everyone today. Thanks guys for joining.
Thanks for your energy.
We've had a few questions, so that's okay. We'll redirect the questions, and if there are some connections, we might connect you with some requests we've had from the audience today. But yeah, thanks Marie, thanks Virginia, thanks Ashish, thanks Apoor for joining and for this live session.
And also
Thank
people
you.
who don't see on the screen,
You all so
we
much.
have to say thank you to Vanessa and Mariah who help us to make it happen this session today. So
Absolutely.
thanks all. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having
much.
us. Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy Friday.